Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Chris Province.
And I am Luke Freeman. And today we are continuing our conversation about intentional leadership. Every month for this season, we have been focusing in on one aspect of managing and leading ourselves to next level performance. We've talked about all sorts of things like our strengths, our values. And today we're talking about finding our unique contribution, specifically in our organizational settings. So in the roles that we hold in organizations, and an organization could be our family, our company we work with, or our community, how do we find and match what we've been learning about ourselves to the setting and what the needs of the setting are? And so we're really excited about this. We've got some great guests this month to help us really say, okay, based on what we've learned about ourselves, how do we apply that? And as always, we've got a new download this month about our unique contribution. You can find that at magicintheroom.com. Download that. Strongly encourage you to follow along as we go.
Well, thanks, Luke, and for letting everybody know that. It's good to be with you all this morning. And I just, let's kind of put first things first here and consider, why is it important for us to understand our contribution? I think it's, when I've engaged other leaders around this conversation and there's like, hey, what's on your mind right now? And I say, well, really what we're thinking through is, how do we work to understand our contribution? How do we apply our skills? How does what we've experienced and what we bring with us tie into that? It's really an area where I don't know that a lot of folks give it a lot of thought, right? So I really kind of honor having the space to think through this idea with you all. And, let's start with why it's important. Why is it?
I think there's a few different reasons, but one of the reasons that come to mind for me is we all want to feel like we're making a difference, right? We want to know that our work counts for something. And when we can see how we play a unique role and are able to have a unique impact, regardless of the scope of our role, right? Just understanding the context that we're in, we can start to see that we're having an impact on the bigger picture. And we're going to talk a little bit later about, understanding our business model and how different roles contribute differently. But not only does the role have a unique contribution, you specifically in your role, right? Each of us show up differently based on our experiences, our personality, all the things that we've talked about so far in our iceberg. That's part of how we show up uniquely. Well, it really kind of starts to feel like purpose when we get clarity on why we're here, what our unique personality experiences have taught us and can contribute to the overall setting that we're in. Not only do we stay more engaged, but we also recognize the impact that we can have on our organizational setting, and we can be intentional about that. And that's really what this, whole season is about intentional leadership. And so understanding our unique contribution helps us to be more intentional.
Yeah. And, for whatever reason, and this feels a little bit cliche, most organizations that we work with have some sort of, we've got this group of people working on things over here that do their own thing, and this group of people working over here doing their own thing, and they're in these different silos and they don't communicate and they get into conflict, or they do double work because they're both working on solving the same problem, whatever. And I think the same thing happens for us as individuals sometimes. I mean, essentially that's two different teams playing by different sets of rules with different ideas and definitions of what success looks like. And if they don't understand how what they're doing contributes to the overarching goal of the organization, and they don't understand their role with their counterpart team, it's really hard for them to be successful. And yeah, the same goes for us. So we see individuals that feel like a roadblock sometimes to everyone around them, but you get down to it and they're really trying to be helpful. They just understand the rules to be a different set of rules, or understand the goal to be a different goal than what a different group of people or the wider organization is working on. And so I think for us to take what's best about ourselves and what we have to offer and plug it in to an organization, like, we really need to have clarity on what is it that we, as a part of this wider thing, are trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And so I want to kind of highlight a couple things about why understanding our contribution is important. The first is, if I understand my contribution, then I understand my role in the maintenance and creation of the something. As we build this organization, as we try to drive initiatives forward, I know what role I have, and I know what pressure I have to apply to create the thing we're trying to create. And if I don't understand that, it leaves the thing we're trying to create, or at least my piece of it, in isolation. And what do we know about isolated systems? When we just stand something up and say, here's this thing, when an organization makes a product or goes to market with a service, if it just sits in isolation after it's kind of produced, then it will experience entropy. It will fall apart. It's that second law of thermodynamics. The performance of things left unattended trend downward. Their utility, their value, and in order to continue to create value or maintain value in any organization, I have to understand what pressures I'm responsible for applying, whether those are developmental or maintenance, in nature. So said another way, whether I'm driving things forward or I'm stewarding things that are already in place, I need to understand what I'm doing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, I want to call, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about this before, but I want to call out that understanding my contribution is also my path to success or significance, right? So Luke just spoke to, how do we define success, right? And I believe understanding our contribution is key to that. And we're going to use some sports analogies today. And I know there's a lot of leaders like, I despise sports analogies. Well, it's because there's, in business, we keep score, we understand kind of what our performance feedback looks like. And I think it's easily translatable. So, when I think about this idea of understanding my contribution being key to success, I do think about John Wooden, and he has a great delivery out there around winning versus significance, right? And what he speaks to is that we define success not by winning, right? So that revenue line is not the win, but it's not about winning that competition. But success is around giving our best effort, striving for personal improvement, and maintaining our character as we go about that. So I do think that contribution is also about character, because once I understand what I'm here to do, am I aligning my effort with, who I believe myself to be? And am I honoring the gifts that I've been given, right, by applying them to my current situation? So that's kind of where I would start with, with this idea of why is it important? But how in the world do we find it? I guess because I don't come into an organization and they look at me as a candidate and they hire me for a role and they're like, but we really need you to do this. Because they don't understand what I've experienced. They understand on paper where I've been, but there's no way for them to understand what I've experienced, what skills I have the most mastery in. So how do we find it?
Yeah, and I think another aspect of what you're saying there is that how could we ever expect them to find it for us? They do not understand the unique value proposition that we bring as individuals. How could they? They haven't lived our lives. So it really is up to us, and I think up to the people listening, to steward and say, what is the best fit? What's the highest possible value I can bring here? And to go back to the sports analogy, that doesn't mean we change how the game is scored, right? If someone comes onto a team, they're not going to change the rules of the game, but only if they understand how it's scored and what the rules are, can they say, oh, this thing that I do will be most valuable if I can be plugged in that way, in that play, in that role, and it's their responsibility to work on that. Now, for us, I think that means all sorts of things. It means, do I talk to my leader about changing my job responsibilities? Do I change organizations if I see that I'm not able to provide the contribution I could here that would be most fulfilling or exciting for me? So we have this wide range of choices that we get to make every day about, am I stewarding what I have to give to the world and the organizations and people around me in the most effective way possible?
Hannah, what are your thoughts around this idea that, organizations, as they bring on a new member, how do they maybe partner to find that?
Yeah, I had similar thoughts to Luke, right? Which is, we have to do the work to know what our value proposition is. That is the responsibility of every individual leader. And by every individual leader, we mean every individual, because we make the assumption that everybody is a leader, right? So part of leading ourselves is to do that work so that we can communicate clearly what our unique contribution value proposition is. But we can't do that unless we've done the work, right? And that's really what this series has been about up until today. We've talked about all these different pieces that are below the surface in the iceberg, our unique experiences, our unique personality, how those play together into what we notice, the choices that we make, and what kind of action we take. All of that, notice, choose, act, is part of we do that in a unique way as individuals, right? And so getting some clarity, and as it could be as simple as following along this podcast, doing the reflection exercises every week. That's part of doing that work, right? There's lots of ways we can arrive there, but I do think as individuals, we have that responsibility to do the work, to be able to communicate clearly, because nobody else is going to find it for us. Now, there may be times when a leader, a mentor, someone notices something in us and calls to that, and it helps us really see it in ourselves and step up to the plate. So I do think leaders can play a role in recognizing strengths, recognizing potential in people who work for them, right? But then it's up to us to what do we do about it?
Yeah, I don't want to call out this idea though, and maybe say something that's a little bit more explicit, is to be effective in to be effective with our contributions, we also have to invest in our ability to make them. So if we're going to make really impactful contributions, we have to grow our skills. So one way, when we talk about finding our contribution, it's this idea, I think, of generically, I say it's about living an interesting life. like looking at, like going through life with appropriate energy and zeal and zest, and saying, who am I? What do I enjoy doing? What roles do I want to explore? What roles do I want to accept? Right. So people run, but they're not a runner. People fish, but they're not an angler. We've talked about that before. Like, I want to keep going through that cycle as many times as I can, because I'm just broadening the types of contributions, and because I'm broadening how much I'm learning. So it's through role, like the number of roles I explore and the number of roles I accept and develop mastery within into my identity also allows me to contribute in more valuable ways as I develop mastery within them. So I think understanding our careers as a role that contributes to our sense of identity, the more mastery we have in the roles that we accept, I believe the more significant we become, right? The more impactful our contributions might be. And in that, I think it's through this investment in ourselves and leading in an interesting and enriching life for ourselves and for the people around us. It's through this that we create legacy. So by investing in me, by exploring roles, by accepting roles, that then becomes my legacy because of my contributions. It's the impact that creates that legacy. And there are only two types of people. There are ones that know that today and the contributions I make today create my legacy. And there's the people that don't know that what I'm doing today is my legacy. And that's why it's that whole sense of honoring our gifts that comes into play, and why it's so important to have that freedom, have that zeal, love life, explore the roles, do the things, and ultimately find a way or path to that level of significance. And it's in every one of us. So anyway, as we think about how we find that contribution, I just want to call out that role of investment. But I think something high value that you all can bring to the table here is talk about context, right? Because different organizations put people in different contexts, even though they might title the role the same, or kind of give me some insight as to what creates that dynamic and how should we think about it as I join an organization. What am I looking for to find context if I'm a leader? What am I doing to help people understand their context? Let's walk through that for a little bit.
Yeah. So when you say understanding the context, to me, that's how are we scoring this game that we're playing, and what are the rules of the game? And I think a lot of folks just completely miss that step altogether, whether it's an organization not clearly explaining what the business model is to folks coming in, or whether that is someone coming in and like just not being interested in it. If we're at a spot where it's like, yeah, I putting my time in and cashing the check, like, we're probably not going to figure out in creative ways how to make a unique contribution to that business or the impact of that business. And I'll give an example. We work mostly with service companies, with companies that are directly providing services as their product, whether that's financial technology or hospitality, or healthcare. And so many times we've showed up and we have a model for like what service is. It's just three things. Is the quality of the service good? Is it delivered in a timely way? And is a meaningful connection created whenever it's delivered? So is it friendly? Is it good? Is it fast? And people sit there and they're like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Never thought about that before. Like, completely new idea. And they might have been a supervisor or manager in a hospitality or healthcare organization for a decade. And they didn't have the words for what is it? What is service? What is the thing that we're providing? And yeah, of course, how can you how could you change your behavior or figure out how do I advance this service if you don't even know what the rules of the game are, how people experience service? So to me, it's uncommon to come into an organization and find a group of people that all really understand what it is they're doing. And I think leaders who, especially if it's a founder or someone who's been doing it for a long time or kind of came up through the ranks, they make the assumption that everyone else understands the rules of the game in the same way that they do, and they don't bother communicating it, clarifying it, training people so they really understand it intuitively and can make the best decisions in real time.
I love that, Luke. This idea that we applied a lot of times when we first engage with a potential client partner, we say, well, if I ask all 1,500 of these employees of, what are we doing here? How many different answers am I going to get? Okay. Why did we show up today? And I think those are helpful questions for leaders to ask and think about it in those terms. If I ask all 1,500 team members here, why did we show up today? How many different answers are there? And if there's more than one answer, we know that there's a lot of work to do, right? If there's 1,500 answers, we have a crazy amount of work to do. And so that's the idea, is it's that bias that we believe everyone else experiences life the same way we do. We have a bias towards believing that other people have the same understandings that we do, especially when we're immersed inside of an organization. But we know that that's not true. If we want to create a system where we believe similarly about why we show up and what we do here, then we have to create a conversation amongst every person in the organization about why we show up and what we do here. And the people are like, oh, that's hard. Like, you mean I got to talk to every team member every month? Well, you don't have to, only if you want them to understand what is in your mind. But if we're not willing to do that, then I feel like there's not a lot of room to complain about why people don't understand what to do. People say, well, why is this so hard? It's because they don't understand why we're here. They don't understand what we're here to do. We're leaving them to transact in these isolated systems. It's like, well, I don't know. We wrote the rules. We wrote the policies. People don't understand. Well, we don't relate to directives and orders and policies and rules. And we do not relate to that. We relate to purpose, aim, objective. Like, we relate to different things than what business and kind of in, traditional business and school teach us.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild to me that the things that we learn at business schools, in universities, so many of those things do not relate or do not create connection or reason to achieve between members of a team. So as you think, as you were talking about service, that's really what was coming to my mind, is there's a lot of conflict here in that we're taught to write policies and rules and have enforcement, and then what people relate to is the conversation. So there's a lot of folks that go through business school and don't ever have an org comms class.
Yeah.
So it's an unfair, the game is tilted, right?
Yeah. And, I think imagine if there was I'll just use American football as an example. If there was an American football game and no one knew the score, and the only things that you saw, the only metrics were the things that they show about every player, like passing yards and how many yards has this person carried the ball and number of interceptions. Like, imagine the experience of being that person who They think their job is to get as many interceptions as possible. And then the dang plays that are getting called don't support that, right? That would be incredibly frustrating if you didn't have the overarching score. And I think the fact that we look at individual stats like that is more a reflection on people's obsession with metrics than it is something meaningful, because there's only one number that matters in the game, and it's the score at the end of the games. Yeah. Right. And so you have these two things happening, people managing their own careers and trying to max their own stats, when in reality, that number only really matters to them for their own personal gain. And in organizations, I mean, I think everyone listening is probably thinking of examples that are very similar. But I want to give another story, which is I was working with a publicly traded organization. They had about 10,000 employees. And people were getting really frustrated because the finance team started putting limits on investment out in kind of the field crews, the people who are out actually creating the goods and services. And people were saying, like, this isn't fair. Like, look at how much money we've made. We need to be able to hire more people, or we need this new piece of equipment. And it went on for a long time and was kind of a common theme for their company, a story that had happened over and over. And this finance leader finally was like, I have to go actually talk to every team in the company. And so he went out on this tour and he was like, I hear the frustration, and you need to understand that there is a stakeholder that we don't talk to every day, that you never see, that doesn't send us a direct email, that we don't share metrics on. And that's Wall Street. Specifically, it's like these three big banks. And when they say, we are going to be scoring you on this thing that no one knows about except for us on this conference call, I have to make decisions based on that, because that's our new metric of success. And for us to survive and be relevant, and for you to maintain your career, I have to manage those things. That's how we all win together. And people are just like, well, I had no idea. I had no idea that Wall Street was so influential.
Yeah.
So like, just anyone who goes to work for a publicly traded company and doesn't understand the dynamics of what's going to be at play there is just a recipe for frustration. So that's the other part of this is, what's the source of all suffering?
Yeah.
Misaligned expectations.
Yeah.
Missed expectations. So if I go into this thinking, hey, all I have to do is max out these 3 KPIs and that's success, but there's some other giant stakeholder with different KPIs that I had no idea about, that's a huge recipe for suffering and frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, even as I was kind of riding shotgun with you on that, on the story that you just shared, I had no idea that shareholders wielded that kind of power over what happens day to day. So that was a huge learning and context for me. And I had worked in publicly traded companies, right? But I was working as an individual in those companies. Kind of like, I went to my cube, I did my work, it was not contextualized, right? And that's why I feel like sharing those types of stories is so helpful. But you going back to the, if we played the game without knowing the score, how would that make sense, right? Well, in businesses, we keep score with, like, revenue is the score, because revenue is that lag indicator, or profit, right? Most likely profit, depending on where you're at in maturation, if you're public or private. So we keep score through revenue and profit, which are both, they're lag indicators for behaviors already completed, right? But I know, Hannah, you have like some specific thoughts around how these models go into play, and different organizations, like all enterprise creates revenue and profit, but do they know how? So if you wouldn't mind share kind of your thoughts on how that comes into play with contribution.
Yeah, well, I'll share a little personal example. And, I worked in the same publicly traded organization as you did, Chris, at a different time than you were there. So yeah, we share some background of early career in telecommunications. And so when I entered that industry, and I was, probably 10 years out of school at that point, and I'd worked in different smaller companies. This was my first experience working for a large enterprise that's publicly traded. And so I call that career 2, if I'm on career 3 right now. Career 1 was preparation. Career 2 was really application of a lot of things that I'd learned. But one of the forming experiences of entering a new industry where I knew I had a unique contribution to make, and I knew I was pretty clear at that point of what kind of impact I wanted to have. But I also knew that I did not know this context, right? And so one of the reasons I chose to start in that industry in sales was because I recognized in a sales role, you learn who our customers are, why they buy from us, what they buy from us, and you have a unique opportunity to understand a business model, right? Because you're on kind of the forefront of bringing in revenue into the company. So I was really intentional about that part, but then I get into this very large organization that has purchased multiple other organizations over the course of the past 6 years prior to me entering. And it's a very complex business at this point. It felt very ambiguous. Like I did not understand how revenue flowed through the business, right? So I set out on this kind of mission to understand how to piece this puzzle together, of understand how, from my entry point of starting a sales conversation with a customer to a service getting installed at their place of business, for that to turn into revenue, right? And it was not an easy task. And there was no streamlined way for me to learn that inside the organization. It required talking to different people. It required getting to know people in different departments, understanding their roles. It required doing some independent study, learning about how these services work, right? So, but I kind of took an interest in it. And at first, it wasn't super intentional because I didn't really know what I didn't know. But then I kind of got on, this track of I need to understand this puzzle. And it took me about 2 years probably to figure that out. So when I was in a position where I was building a training program to help other people that were new to the industry, right? Recent college graduates really learn this business so that they could be effective in sales. We put together a really intentional training program that was aimed at understanding this entire ecosystem and understanding the business model. And part of that too was listening in on the quarterly earnings calls with the CEO of our company, answering questions to Wall Street, right? So that not only did we learn how our unique role contributed to the overall metrics of the company, but also recognizing what are the metrics that Wall Street is looking at, right? And what are those things that the shareholders are really looking for in our performance. And in a very large organization like that, it can seem like a really far distance from my role and my day-to-day and what I do to Wall Street and what's being reported on the street. But I think having that context helps you recognize, right? What are some of the things I should be paying attention to? Because this is the score that my company is getting graded on. So I think my personal journey was really learning that for myself, which wasn't easy, and then creating a more streamlined process for new people coming into the company, learning all those pieces, right? Which really was, put simply, understanding our business model and understanding what we get measured on.
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's a lot of correlation and similarities between your story, Hannah, and my own, especially as it comes to, there's this, I think where I see commonalities is escalation in roles and responsibilities through mastering the fundamentals of where we've been before in order to pull pieces together, to put a puzzle together, to move from individual contribution into more systems impact as I start learning the system. Right. So that is really my story of how I found my unique contribution was, being in marketing and saying, okay, learn and develop and deliver marketing fundamentals, and then promoting into operations and saying, okay, learn these fundamentals and lead a team of people that are also responsible for executing on these fundamentals. And then it's, not just lead a department, but lead a division. So you're going along the way, I'm learning very specific, or having discoveries and learning details. So details and discoveries in every role. As I increase the amount of responsibility that I have and experience different parts of the organization. So, as I sit here today, that's something I can call out as what really contributed to help me find my contribution is in doing that. I think the first mindset switch was I can only control the controllables. I don't get to pick, okay, this idea of going from pick me to I pick me, right? So I'm sitting here as an employee of an organization. Well, I hope they pick me for this, or I hope I get selected for that, or I hope I get to do that next. Those things aren't up to me. I might master those details and have those discoveries, but I don't get to pick where I'm going to be. The only thing I could do is control the controllable of I pick me. That means I value learning. That means I value teaching. That means I have those and paying enough attention to have the discoveries, learn the details, build the mastery, and invest, like we were talking before. Those are the things that are required. So if I want to call out the four things, let's pick ourselves, control the controllable. I pick me. I don't know that they're ever going to pick me. Okay, so I'm going to control that controllable. I'm going to develop the mastery through details and discovery. I'm going to value learning. I'm going to value teaching. I'm also going to value teamwork, right? So teamwork over individual accolades. And that was where I've talked in previous episode, who's carrying whose flag. Put my flag down, pick up other people's flag, floodgates open. As long as I was wanting to carry my flag, I wasn't going to go anywhere because I didn't have impact, right? So those are kind of some key ideas that led me to the discovery. But what ended up happening when I went from marketing to operations to working with finance and LD&E to all of that, what I started to understand is there is a model through which we create profit. And at the time I was in gaming and hospitality, and it was wild to me that I've worked in all these different departments in these different areas, and throughout the industry, there's no such thing as this model where it's here's how casinos make money. There was not a model through which we could learn how all of these things interacted. And that was ultimately the outcrop of me paying attention and going through, investing in my education and staying engaged and paying attention to what's going on around me, is I developed the casino profit model. It did not exist until I built it. But I thought why have I worked here for 5 years and nobody has told me how this thing actually makes money? Right? What is the model we're operating? That was like a light bulb / make my head blow off my shoulders moment. It's like, how come we're not telling people how these things make money? So out of that, the casino profit model was born, and kind of speaking to, understanding that a lot of things don't exist until we make them exist, until we take that responsibility to say, I want to make a contribution this way because I see an opportunity, for no other reason than I see an opportunity to make one. And that very much correlates to our purpose to profit process, right? That did not exist until we built it. Nobody's out there saying, here's why you having a purpose directly correlates to you having a profit. And that is not our opinion, that is science. So if A, then Z. And there's a lot of things that happen between there. If you have purpose, it can multiply your profit. That visual and that process did not exist until this team created it. And so now we take that and we help other leaders make contributions, because I think a lot of people believe similarly. People don't relate to orders and directives. They relate to purpose. But like this, how do we activate it? And I think that's that technical skill of how we activate it into profit is really that particular science that we understand in deep ways, that's just not produced for mass consumption. It's not what you read about in USA Today. So anyway, that's my story on the things that were in play or in line for identifying how I can contribute in unique ways. But then the most important thing is translating that into team impact and the work that we all get to do together. So thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's a great case study in someone doing the work to understand which lever to pull that will create the most value. And when two things exist, I know what lever or levers to pull to create the most value, and I understand everything that we've been talking about in this series about myself to know which of those levers, how to do it, I'm best outfitted to do. When those things exist, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to have high impact, and I'm going to be doing things that are really fulfilling for me. And so if someone doesn't understand, like your story or Hannah's story about like just doing this tour of the company and really verbalizing it in this training program, here's how this thing works and what produces outcomes across this system. When we do that, we are way ahead of 95% of the rest of the team. And I've had this conversation with lots of people inside large organizations to just say, be a generalist. Like if you have grown up, started your career as a specialist, you have some sort of technical skill, engineering, tech development, whatever, like that's good. You got to hold on to that. But also you have to have wider field vision if you're going to navigate to the places that you could, right? And, some people aren't interested in this. And my guess is they're not listening to this podcast, right? They want to be able to transact, do their thing, right? But even for those people, having that field vision of what's happening is helpful for them to find the place where they can be most fulfilled. If I want to be able to show up for 40 hours a week and cash a check and have a meaningful, financially sustainable career, I should know if my field is in growth mode or in structural decline. I would not go work at a network, a TV network right now. If you work at CNN or Fox, you are in structural decline. Less people are watching that than are listening to the top 10 podcasts every day that come out. Just FYI, that's what the stats say. So, understanding that is important. If someone's in oil and gas and they're like, yeah, we've been around for 50 or 100 years and we're just going to innovate ourselves out of this structural decline in oil and gas. Well, like, that's what you want to do. But you have to think, if I was on Wall Street, what would I do? Would I put my innovation dollars in renewables in this 100-year-old oil and gas company, or would I fund a startup in renewables? They are not going to allow you to innovate in the way that you might want to, right? So understanding what's the status of my industry really is going to help you know, like, what my strategy is. How do I plug myself in here? And, I'll just continue to overwhelm people and waterboard here, but like, what is the competitive strategy that we're using? If my organization was a car, would it be a Ford Taurus? Would it be a Tesla? Would it be a Jeep? Would it be a Dodge cargo van? Each of those is an example of a competitive strategy. One's overall low cost, one's overall differentiation, one is focused differentiation, one is focused low cost. So like, you should be able to categorize yourself. We at Purpose and Performance Group are overall differentiation. We're not going to go into that on this podcast, but like, I know the answer to that question, and that helps me know where I spend my energy and effort each day, where I can both use my strengths and skills the best and have the highest impact in the context of working with this team.
Yeah, that's strong. Yeah, excellent takeaways, Luke. Hannah, thoughts around that?
No, I think just as we're kind of starting to wrap up, some of my just takeaways from this whole conversation is the importance of knowing who your stakeholders are, of understanding the business model that your organizational setting or your industry or your particular company operates with, and knowing the score, right? If we know those three things, my stakeholders, my business model, and what is the score, I can be intentional as a leader, as an individual contributor, in how I contribute uniquely, right? And as we said in the beginning, that starts with also having done the internal work of knowing myself, knowing what my skills are, or be intentional about building skills within my areas of strength, and then understanding how my unique personality can contribute more meaningfully, right? So we need to have both internal awareness and external focus and understanding of the context we're in. And I think if we have those two things and we can match up what my unique skill sets are with this unique context that I'm in, I can be incredibly effective as a leader. And if as a leader, I can help to communicate that to my team members and help them do the same thing, then I can be really impactful as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think there's some real bottom rung things that we haven't really touched on that I think I'd like to wrap up with today. And that's understanding that our foundations for contribution and what that is. Those are industriousness. Like, so how do I go about being industrious? Being a person of high utility. That is fundamental in making contribution. Being and having good friends is fundamental in our ability to make a contribution. So how can I become more industrious? How can I become a better friend? Or how can I increase the richness of those relationships? And kind of the third point I want to leave with this part is like being enthusiastic. Because if I am enthusiastic and I'm a good friend and I am highly industrious, I am going to be able to make significant contributions. But that also requires me to have humility and be humble. that allows for people to connect and share, and allows for me to learn, and allows for me to teach in ways that are different than those counterparts. To Luke's point about differentiation, how do we create that? Bottom rung things, like these really fundamental principles that are required to make those contributions. So what I would say is, what's that thing that you've been putting off exploring? What's that role or activity? They're like, I really think I might like to do this. I want to encourage people to go do that. What's the thing you've been wanting to learn that you haven't learned yet? I want to encourage the people that I'm close to and care about, the people that listen to this podcast. I want to encourage you to go do that. Hey, I haven't talked with so-and-so in a while. I miss them, or I feel like I'm longing for some type of connectivity. Like, make that phone call. Let's commit together to growing our industriousness and growing our friendships and elevating our enthusiasm as we go through life. Because the expectation that I talk about, the bell curve of life, like average pulls us to not do those things, especially as we mature. Like, our friend groups become smaller. The number of new things we explore become fewer. Our industriousness becomes fixed. Like that, those are the expectations, it feels, of what life projects and thinks for us. So how do we break that? And I think that's where like true character comes from. Like, my ability to be industrious, be a great friend, be enthusiastic is a direct reflection of my character, the gifts I've been given, and what I believe to be true. So how do I go out there and do those things today? So that's kind of my parting thoughts. And I before we cut loose out of here today, I'm just you guys give me your summary of today. What are you taking away from the time we spent together, and how might it show up more in your lives or careers as we move forward, thinking about contribution?
Yeah, so for me, it's pretty simple. What do you want? And all these things are doable. I think if you're like, I really don't want to go do all the homework like Hannah had to do. I don't want to have to create some intellectual property about how a business works like Chris did. Like, that's okay. You don't have to, but what do you want? And I think it's helpful just to know that all these things are knowable and doable. You could understand the entire profit model of the company you're in. And if you did, it would be really valuable. And if you're a leader and you got it on paper and actually communicated it to everyone, so everyone was playing from the same rules, it would have value. So do you want to do it or not? And if you want to, you can. I'm not saying everyone should. I'm just saying if you want to, you can. And I think there would be positive impact. So I don't know. That's my takeaway. And it's a challenge to myself too. How do I keep understanding? And we've got clients in some industries right now that we haven't worked with as much in the past. So, I mean, that's the kind of the constant challenge for me. Mm-hmm. How do I learn the model of what they're doing better than they know it, so I can turn around and outfit them with that? And I want to do that. And there's nothing stopping me from doing it. So I'm going to do it.
That's right. That's awesome. Love that, Luke. Thank you. Hannah?
Yeah, I think it's a similar challenge for me, right? This whole conversation has kind of inspired me to continue to learn the business models of our clients. Now that I'm in career 3, I had this career 2 of applying and executing on one business model, learning that. Now career 3 is like, I get to learn lots of different business models and help educate clients on, how they can make a unique contribution. And to me, that's super exciting. And yeah, I'm all with Luke. You don't have to, but you get to if you want to. And it's super valuable if you choose to do that. And I want to choose to continue to learn and build my own understanding of how individuals can contribute uniquely and how different companies contribute uniquely and how they're measured and what their purpose is. That's what the work that we get to do every day. And so I think that's a great invitation to all of you listeners. If you want to connect with us, you can get some help in doing this, right?
Yeah. And where can they find us, Luke? You want to let them know?
Yep. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. If you like us, leave a review. You can share this episode with your friends. We would like that. Hannah, you want to read us out?
Sure. Yeah. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bradford, and Luke Freeman. It is produced by Ben West. Social media management is by Anna Holland and Maggie King Robinson. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded remotely in Oklahoma and Montana. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes at magicintheroom.com.
Thank you all very much. Look forward to a lot more meaningful work together. And until next time, see you soon.
Let's do it.